So, good afternoon and welcome back. Welcome to our third session. So, this is the continuation of our discussion on the law on Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2012. So, in the previous two sessions, I gave you an overview of what the law is all about, how it is being violated, what are the acts that will constitute violations of the law, and then you also learned in the previous session that even if you don't directly participate in the commission of the act, you will also become liable thereto by being either an accessory or an accomplice. Okay? We also discussed last time regarding qualified trafficking in persons. If the act if the victim are children below 18 years of age, or even if they are above 18 years of age but they cannot fully take care of themselves, or there is a sort of a mental problem, with regards the victim. Okay, so now we will go to the reporting mechanisms, as to whom are you going to report trafficking of persons and the prosecution of the crime. So, where should incidents of trafficking in persons be reported? So first, kinsa may pinakaduol na to, our barangay authorities. So, who are these barangay authorities? Ang atong punong barangay or ang atong giingon nga kapitan, barangay kapitan, ang mga konsihal, mga tanod, or kinsa imong nailhan nga barangay officials. Okay? Now, the nearest police or other law enforcement agencies. Local Social Welfare and Development Office. There's sa baybay, asa man ang atong CSWD office na asa atong karaan nga telecom nga building na adults Jollibee, So kung namin mga problema regarding trafficking in persons, na may nabatian nga victims trafficking in persons, dool ra accessible ra ang atong CSWD office with Mr. Icon Donaire as head. Naara siya dool sa Jollibee, tapad sa Daidings, Now, any member agencies of the Interagency Council Against Trafficking. Now, I would also like to announce that Baybay has its own ordinance on anti-trafficking in persons. So, naatay local Interagency Council Against Trafficking. So, we have the local anti-trafficking committee or task force, the local council for the protection of children, and action line or hotline on human trafficking 1343. Okay? Now, international trafficking in persons can be reported to the following: the Philippine Embassy or Consulate, which has jurisdiction over the place where the trafficking occurred, where the trafficked person is or may be found. So, in almost all countries na atang nga mga embassy or consulate, pangitaon lang ninyo nga ang embassy or consulate sa Pilipinas. And then all officers, representatives, personnel of the Philippine government posted abroad under the leadership of ambassador or the head of mission, Office of the Undersecretary of the Migrant Workers Affairs or OWA, and the Department of Foreign Affairs. You can there are also law enforcement agencies are mandated to immediately initiate investigation and counter trafficking intelligence gathering upon receipt of statements or affidavits from victims of trafficking, migrant workers, or other families who are in possession of knowledge or information about trafficking in persons cases. Okay, law enforcement agencies are also mandated to immediately initiate investigation and counter trafficking intelligence gathering upon receipt of the statements or affidavits of the victims of trafficking, migrant workers, or families who are in possession of knowledge or information about trafficking in persons. So, this is a major concern in our society, and our law enforcement agencies are tasked or are mandated by this law to take immediate action whenever there is a complaint on anti-trafficking of persons that is being filed in their specific office. So, as I have said, the city of Baybay is also has its own anti-trafficking council by virtue of the ordinance that the council passed last year. So, we have our own ordinance on this matter. Okay? So, who can file cases for trafficking in persons? Now, first is any person, including a law enforcement officer who has personal knowledge of the crime or the commission of the crime. So, anybody or any law enforcement officer. Then the trafficked person or the offended party. So, kinsa na siyang hintungdan. And then the parents or legal guardians. So kung wala siya parents, ang iyang legal guardians, iyang grandparents or kinsay na ay kinsay iyang guardian, no? The spouse ay iyang asawa, siblings, mga igsuon, and then his or her children. So pwede ra ascendants, descendants, or the spouse. Okay? The complaints for violation of R39008 as amended may be filed with the following. So asa pwede siya i-file? Sa Department of Justice, sa National Prosecution Service, the Provincial or City Prosecution Office. Ang atong City Prosecution Office is naa sa formerly PNB, naa sa atong gym, diri sa Baybay. Ang atong Provincial Prosecution Office naa sa kilid sa atong Regional Trial Court, diri sa Korte. Okay? Where the offense was committed, where any of the elements of the offense occurred, or where the trafficked person resides at the time of the commission of the crime. So pwede ni siya kung asa nahitabo, no, ang crime or ang offense, or where any of the elements of the offense occurred. So for example, taga-Baybay siya, gi-transport siya sa Cebu, pag human sa Cebu, gingadto siya sa Malaysia. So pwede ra i-file mo sa Cebu, pwede i-file mo sa Baybay. Or where the trafficked person resides at the time of the execution or the commission of the crime. Kung taga-diin siya, gyud. For example, taga-Barangay Buena Vista, so sa Baybay ni mo i-file ka, taga-Baybay man siya. No? Buena Vista is under Baybay. Okay. Now, cases involving trafficking in persons should not be dismissed based on an affidavit of desistance executed by the victims, their parents, or legal guardians. Prosecutors are directed to oppose and manifest objections to motions for dismissal. Now, daghan nga mga criminal cases ma-dismiss kay mo file og affidavit of desistance ang victims, no, or ang complainant. Now, under this act, no, if there are complaints or cases on anti-trafficking of persons filed in our courts, the prosecutors are mandated to oppose the manifest objection to the affidavit of desistance being executed by the victims, no, or their parents or guardians. Dili automatically nga i-dismiss sa korte. Ma-oppose pa ng prosecutor, ma-investigate pa ng judge kung ano mo i-presentar pa ng kanang complainant, nganong mo desist man mo, nganong di mamo padayon sa hinungdan, sa magkandak pa na ang clarificatory questions ang judge, no? O ang fiscal sad maniguro pud siya nga dili dayon ma-dismiss, no? Now, the Philippine Embassy or Consulate shall extend all possible assistance to victims of trafficking who wishes or opts to file the case in the host country, where he or she is found, and where the laws of the country allows the prosecution of a trafficking offense or related or similar offense. Now, what is the prescriptive period for filing of this case? Now, when you say prescriptive period, kanus-an ni mo siya dapat i-file, no? So, tanan mga kaso na siya yung mga prescriptive period, kanus-a ka pwede mo file, or hantod kanus-a ka pwede mo file. Now, trafficking cases can be filed within 10 years after they are committed. If trafficking is committed by a syndicate or a large scale, kinamdum mo atong syndicate, if it is committed by at least 3 persons confederating or conspiring with each other, or against a child, or a large scale committed against 3 or more persons, or it's committed against a child, this can be filed within 20 years after the commission of the act. The prescriptive period is counted from the day the trafficked person is delivered or released from the conditions of bondage. So, gikan sa pagkahitabo or na-release na ka ba, nakagawas na ka sa slavery, sa prostitution, or sa forced labor, mo-count diha ang 10 years, no? 10 years for the trafficking of persons. Now, it becomes 20 years kung ang perpetrator, kung ang offender, at least 3 katao, sindikato, or ang biktima, 3 persons or more, or bata. Okay? So, on sa difference, kung normal lang siya nga trafficking in persons, it prescribes after 10 years. But if it is committed by a syndicate, or against, or on a large scale, more than 3 or more are victims, or against a child, it can be filed within 20 years after the commission of the crime. What happens kung malapas na ang 10 years? Walay reklamo. As the law says, you should file it within the prescriptive period. So, wala na ka pwede mo file. Wala na wala na mahimong kaso ni ana kay ni-prescribe na ang imong right pag-file. So mas dugay siya kung ang biktima bata or katong large scale or syndicate, no? Remember, it is counted from the time the trafficked person is delivered or released from bondage. So dili sa paghitabo untahay gi-traffic, gi-kidnap ka o gi-engage in prostitution for 3 years and then after that nakagawas ka. So kano sa man magsugod ang prescriptive period? The prescriptive period will start from the moment nga nakagawas ka. Okay, you count 10 years or 20 years depende sa kinsa ang victim or kinsa ang perpetrators. Understood? Okay. Now, does the law provide extraterritorial jurisdiction on acts committed outside the Philippines? The state shall exercise jurisdiction over trafficking acts committed outside the Philippines and whether or not such an act or acts constitute an offense at the place of the commission, the crime being a continuing offense having been commenced in the Philippines and other elements committed in another country. That's what I have said earlier. This is a continuing offense, no? Pwede siya nimo i-file kung asa ang elements sa crime to A. So pag transport niya, hapit-hapit siya from Baybay to Manila to Davao. So pwede naman siya file sa Baybay, sa Manila or sa Davao. Pero kung nasa sa lain na, so we take jurisdiction over this act, no? Because we consider this one as a continuing offense. Okay? Now, what are the penalties for the violations of this act? Now, acts of trafficking, bugat-bugat yun ha, imagine, you will be spending 20 years of imprisonment and a fine of 1 million to 2 million pesos. So, katong kung gainin nyo ganina nga, attempted trafficking, 15 years imprisonment and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million. Accomplice, katong appeal ka, no? Dili gid ikaw ang mastermind, pero nagtabang ka, no? So, 15 years imprisonment and a fine of 500 to 1 million. Accessories, tawin ko na kung ganyan na nga, teacher ka, niya nag-invite lang ka, pag-speak diya sa imong klase, niya, medyo kailabot sa recruitment, pero kabalo ka nga in the long run, your students will be exploited. So, you are an accessory to the crime. So, you mapriso ka for 15 years if you will be found guilty. And a fine of 500,000 pesos. And acts that promote trafficking, 15 years imprisonment and a fine of 1 million pesos. So, bugat-bugat no? And then we have qualified trafficking. Remember sa itong qualified trafficking? Number 1, if it is committed against a child, no? If it's committed against a child or those within the definition of a child under our law. Then, if it is committed in a large scale or by a syndicate, no? So, the penalty is life imprisonment. Imagine kang life imprisonment and a fine of 2 million to 5 million. Pero ka na life imprisonment, di na pagpasabutangan, mamatay ka na akas prisuhan, no? So, there could be at least the most could be around 30 to 40 years in prison. After that, makagawas na ka, no? Why is it called life imprisonment? Nga, dili man gyud ingon nga, pakamatyon yung kas prisuhan. Because basically, when you're in prison about 30 to 40 years, do you still have a life? Wala na, no? That's why it is called probably life. That is why it is deemed to be life imprisonment. Kay practically, you will, there's nothing left of you when you go out after like 30 to 40 years in prison. So, do not commit trafficking in persons. Palayo mo ani nga crime or you help disseminate information that this crime is like carries this huge penalty so that kini nga mga perpetrator mahadlok po ni sila, no? So violation of confidentiality, 6 years imprisonment and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million, and use of trafficked person, correctional or imprisonment of 6 months and 1 day to 6 years and a fine of 50 to 100,000 pesos. Okay, now use of trafficked person if it involves sexual intercourse or lascivious conduct with a child. So, excuse me, wala kay labot sa trafficking ha, dili ikaw nang kidnap, dili ikaw nang ilad, pero kabalo ka nga kini nga bata, traffic, ikuan ni siya, kidnap ni siya for her to engage in prostitution niya. Ikaw, usa ka sa mga customer, no? So, you use the trafficked person, you were involved in a sexual intercourse or lascivious conduct with a child which is a victim of child trafficking. So, you will also be penalized, no? The penalty is reclusion temporal and it's medium to reclusion perpetua. So 500,000 to 1 million fine. If it involves carnal knowledge of sexual intercourse with a male or female trafficked victim and the use of force or intimidation against victim, deprived of reason or unconscious victim, or victim under 12 years of age. Remember, when you engage in the Philippines, when you engage in sexual intercourse with a child, no, 12 years below, even if it was the child who really asked for it, siya ang nanguna, siya nag-una-una, nga to sa imong balay, iya kang gilior, iya kang gitinta, bata siya na to sa inyo. Now, under our law, remember that even if it is with the fullest consent sa bata, it is rape, no? It is statutory rape under our law. What do you mean by statutory rape? It becomes rape. Dili gud na siya rape sa in a real sense kay ang rape pinugos man ano, but it becomes rape because ang victim kay bata man 12 years and below. So be careful gid mo ha, be careful gid kay mo anang manguyab mo grade 6 or kanang inyong mga estudyante in grade 6 or mas bata pa grade 5, delikado kay na. So even pa ang bata pa naguna-una, no, si Japay yang ato sa inyo, si Japay ni higda ato sa imong katre, no? Si Japay naglock sa kwarto, nya. Di jud ka makaingon nga consensual na siya, okay? When it involves a child below 12 years, it is rape, always rape. Okay? If it is committed by a foreigner or committed by a public official. So if it is committed by public official, it carries dismissal from office or perpetual absolute disqualification and imprisonment. What happens to the fines, proceeds, and properties derived from trafficking in persons? All fines imposed and proceeds and properties forfeited and confiscated shall accrue to the trust fund to be administered and managed by the Interagency Council Against Trafficking. They shall be used exclusively for programs that will prevent acts of trafficking and will protect, rehabilitate, and reintegrate trafficked persons into the mainstream society. Okay? So, gamito na siya. Now, what are the mandatory services available for trafficked persons? Unsa may mandatory services? So, temporary housing and food facilities, psychological support and counseling, free legal services, medical or psychological services, livelihood and skills training, educational assistance to trafficked child. So we also have a 24-hour call center, no, for crisis calls. So these are the services available for victims of trafficking. Okay. Now, what protection mechanisms are available to trafficked persons? So, as I have said, we have legal protection. We have free legal assistance, temporary custody, right to privacy and confidentiality. That this WD and even the courts, they are not allowed to divulge the identity of victims of trafficking, especially if these victims are very young and they are lured into prostitution. So what happens if there are cases, everybody in the court except the judge and the stenographer and the lawyers will stay, no? So kung ang kaso involving bata niya, rape sa bata, pagawso na ang uban mga abogado rin mahabilin. Isang gani kami, ako di ko maminaw kay di ko ganahan, no? Magawas mi para pud ang bata, maluoy pud ang bata nga maghatag og testimony, no? So right to information, and then witness protection program, tagaan na siya protection sa government para di siya mahadlok nga mo reklamo, especially if ang perpetrator the offender is a syndicate, no? Now, victim compensation program. So, she will be afforded financial assistance. Naihatag nga financial assistance by the government for her to start anew, no? Para na siya confidence nga mabalik siya, umingle siya sa kadaghanan. Okay? Now, are foreign nationals trafficked in the Philippines entitled to assistance? No. Nabay mga foreigners nga gi-traffic diri sa Pilipinas. Do you think na ay mga tagalayang country nga victims of trafficking nga sa Pilipinas? Yes, naapod na, no? Kining mga Chinese, no? Napatay mga Chinese nga mga workers nga nasa mga factories, no? There are some of them who are trafficked, na victims of anti-trafficking. Then other nationalities as well. So victims of trafficking in persons who are foreign nationals are entitled to appropriate protection, assistance, and services. So, dili lang atong mga nationals ang atong itabangan. ato pong gitabangan ang mga taga laing nasod nga biktima po sa trafficking nga niya sa Pilipinas. They shall also be permitted continued presence in the Philippines for a length of time prescribed by the Council as necessary to effect prosecution of the offenders. Okay. Now, what are the protection given to service providers? So, these are the law enforcers, the social workers. So, they are protected under the law. They are given protection under the law. No? So, service providers shall report any threat, harassment, or any form of danger that they may encounter in the course of the performance of their duties to their superiors, law enforcement agencies, or other appropriate units, and agency heads shall take all possible measures to ensure protection for job-related stress and safety of service providers in the performance of their duties. So, namang giuban nga ang kontra sindikato, mga dagko kaya nga tao, hadlok ang mga government agencies, so tagaan na sila protection. So, what are programs established for the prevention of anti-trafficking? So, we have the Advocacy and Communication Committee. We have the 1343 Action Hotline Against Human Trafficking, and we also have legal counseling. Okay? So, that ends our discussion on RA 10364 or Anti-Trafficking of Persons Act. But before that, there are 5 tips on how to help stop human trafficking. So first, of course, we have to raise awareness. So this program is a good thing. No? I commend the organizers of this activity because this raise awareness that there's indeed a problem in the Philippines. There is indeed this thing about human or trafficking in persons now happening in the Philippines. No? So we have to raise awareness that the problem will not end unless everyone knows that that the problem exists in the first place. So how do we raise awareness? This is one of these ways, no? Kining pagkandak og mga seminars or conferences or discussions on human or child trafficking. So fundraising for anti-trafficking organizations, volunteer for anti-trafficking organizations. Diba, hilig sa kaitang mag-post-post sa Facebook, no? Pwede sa ta mag-post sa Facebook how to raise awareness on to stop human trafficking. Then we have civic engagement to promote anti-trafficking legislation. So as I have said, and proud to say that Baybay has its own ordinance on anti-trafficking in persons, but I don't think there are all local governments have legislations on this matter. And of course, very important is reporting of human trafficking. So if you know of a friend or friends who are being victims or victimized by human traffic, if you have so if you have friends who are being victims of human trafficking, or you know somebody who's into human trafficking, please report it to the local authorities. They are not allowed to divulge your identity, so do not worry, because they have confidentiality, no? So that is one of the ways in which we could help stop human trafficking, is to report any incident that we think is related to or might lead to human trafficking.